I said I needed you.
You know within 5 bars, that's Dusty singing.
People think of her as a very tragic figure. She wasn't.
Dusty was very funny and silly.
So friendly, so nice.
She was such a unique person.
She sang like Marilyn Monroe looked.
I don't think there ever will be anybody else like her.
Welcome to Definitively Dusty. I'm Tris Penner, and I was lucky enough to have worked with Dusty. She was an amazing lady, and we were good friends. So, I'm your guide of the next 3 programmes where we pay tribute to one of the greatest singers this country has ever produced, and hear why and how she created her own unique sound. With the help of some of her friends and people who worked closely with her over the years, we will be discovering the art and artistry of Dusty Springfield. And as we have access to extraordinary unheard interviews and recording sessions with Dusty, she tells her own story through her music and in her own words.
I really probably owe it all to my father, who raised me on what would now be BBC Radio 3. Certainly didn't know what pop music was. It was a mixture of sort of Schoenberg and Jelly Roll Morton. My father liked jazz, he liked Ella Fitzgerald. I was also raised on Latin American, Brazilian music and 20th Century Fox musicals. Fairly eclectic upbringing.
Mary Isabel Catherine Bernadette O'Brien was born in 1939 and was obsessed with music from a very early age, spending a teenage years singing in Belgravia supper clubs before learning her stagecraft in the Lana Sisters, finally hitting the charts with the Folksy Springfields. All this before she launched her solo career in 1963. This is Definitively Dusty.
I was born, so they tell me, in West Hampstead. And then the war came along. And so my parents and 2 kids, my brother Diane, who's now Tom, and we were evacuated to High Wycombe. I like to say West Wycombe because it's posher. But my parents were really odd because they really hated being that far from London. So they never unpacked. They kept saying, oh, we're going back to London. Transient. But O'Briens were tinkers in Ireland anyway. And my great-grandparents ran a travelling Gilbert and Sullivan show. So I swear that comes through in the blood. And eventually we did go back to London. Well, we went back to Ealing. It was as close as we could get. Peggy Lee, the person who most made me want to be a singer. Why don't you do it? That was great. That influenced me.
You had plenty money, 1922. You let other women make a fool of you. Why don't you do right like some other men do?
I know I could never sound like her, but I wanted to.
On the hill, but I never heard them ringing. No, I never heard them at all.
She to me swings as much as anyone in the entire world, and it all sounds so effortless.
There were birds in the sky, but I never saw them winging. No, I never saw them at all till there was you.
I love a piano, I love a piano. I love to hear somebody play upon a piano, a grand piano. It simply carries me away. I know a fine way to treat a Steinway.
Before the Springfields, I used to sing with my brother sometimes and on my own in sort of very smart Belgravia supper clubs. And one in Chelsea called La Rascas, which was wonderful. They had a one-eyed cook. And he used to come out and dance with Rita Hayworth and Michael Wilding. And it was just this wonderful sort of bohemian place. I used to play these places with a guitar. And I used to get through like 100 songs a night. And no one would really listen. Apart from Michael Wilding and Jack Lemmon, who applauded me. But to this day, I love Jack Lemmon. I used to sing in all these different languages. I didn't know what I was singing about, but I was an incredible mimic. So I could sing in Turkish and I could sing in Spanish and I could sing in Portuguese, but with a Brazilian accent. And they would say, "Oh, she's brought her banjo. Do play." A sort of debutante parties in Eaton Square. Sing K la 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 la. They always wanted you to sing something they'd heard on their skiing halls. The mums were great because they'd sort of say, "Oh, do come upstairs and we'll feed you." So there was a giant trough in the attic. On a big night, I went a guinea a night. But that was great training. Now I wonder why I get laryngitis if I sing one song. We used to get through 100 a night. But it's okay because no one was listening.
When Dusty left her Ealing Convent School in the summer of 1955, her music apprenticeship began. She was determined to get as much experience as she could at a professional level. So, she answered an ad in the Stage for a new member to join a girl vocal trio, the Lana Sisters, formed by Reese Chantel and Lynn Essex. Dusty was called in for an audition.
She gets out a guitar and she sings a few songs with us. So we said, OK, fine. Now we want to see how you are with harmonies. And immediately she did the bottom harmony with no problem whatsoever. And it sounded great. And whatever we threw at her, she could do it easy as anything. But the main thing with Dusty was the movements on stage. It just wasn't natural to her at all. Another thing you see, she wasn't used to wearing high heels. The very first performance that she had was in Lincoln, in the big cinema. So, of course, we're in the dressing room and we're all ready, you know, got our lame trousers on, we're all glamorous and everything. And 5 minutes, girls, 5 minutes, girls. We go down the stairs, and of course, Dusty being Dusty was always lagging behind. She slips, doesn't she? We had little skirts that went over the top first, but then halfway through the song, we'd swish these two little skirts, and then you got these trousers. And of course, there she was with quite a nasty tear. She was a bit unfriendly, but she did improve.
But I knew that if I joined something that, an act that actually worked, not in a sort of semi-amateur way, but actually got booked by Tito Burns and things that actually went and did American air bases. Oh, if you can survive that.
You got what it takes, to satisfy. You got what it takes to set my soul on fire. Whoa, 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 whoa. Ooh, yeah. You got what it takes for me.
She was also very good at Latin American. She could sing with her brother. When we used to go to her flat with her mum and dad, they'd sit in the corner and they'd play together. They all sang in Spanish, and she'd play the bongos, brilliant on the bongos. I could have listened to them for hours.
My brother liked Carmen Miranda. She had a band, Banda de la Lua, who was the best rhythm section, which led me to love Brazilian music.
Meu ganso faz tica-tica-bum tico, pra eu cantar no tica-tica-bum tico.
She learnt an awful lot while she was with the Lana Sisters because we were gently putting her into it, giving her the confidence and huge experience for recording, radio, television. So her brother, I think, thought, oh, that's a good idea. Perhaps we can do a three-handed act.
Break away, my heart is dying. Break away, the time is flying. So I'm gonna tell myself.
It's excellent training, so that when the Springfields came along, I actually was the only one who'd ever set foot on the stage. So in that way, it was good, tough training.
I'm gonna break away, break away.
We were pseudo everything, and we knew it. I mean, we just jumped up and down a lot.
Break away.
There was a niche somewhere for cheerful people.
So I'm gonna pack a bag and get
We were terribly out of tune. We just sang very fast and very cheerfully.
take a train or take a boat. Well, I'm gonna break away.
But in the States, there was the Weavers. There was a lead singer called Ronnie, a woman, big woman with this great voice. Ronnie Gilbert. He's sort of what I call a buxom voice. So I wanted to sound buxom.
Sometimes I live,
And sort of sturdy and folksy.
sometimes I live in town. Sometimes I take a great notion to jump into the river and drown.
That made sense for us to do that because we sang, rather badly but extremely loudly.
Ay, 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 silito lindo, lindo. Ay, 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 silito lindo, lindo.
And they gave us a TV series, would you believe? We didn't have a record or anything, but that was the BBC for you. All we did was look friendly, which we weren't. Well, we weren't even friendly with each other, let alone to the world.
Canta y no llores, porque cantando se alegra el cielito lindo los corazones. Ay, 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 canta y no llores, porque cantando se alegra el cielito lindo los corazones. Ay, 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 cielito lindo, lindo.
1960 saw the newly formed Springfields touring UK concert halls and cabaret clubs, getting known for their versatility and harmonies of songs written by Brother Tom, as well as singing country and folk music from around the world. In 1961, A&R manager Johnny Franz auditioned the Springfields and was so impressed he immediately offered them a contract with Philips Records.
I thought they were very good. They had a good sound, chiefly due to Dusty's great sound. We had several hits with them. They became a very big group.
Shiny rebel of a night on me. Well, I never had a blues song in my life before, till my baby left me at the station door. Big midnight special, shiny light on me. Big midnight special, shiny rebel of a night on me.
I was the worrier. I was the one that always wanted to get it right. We changed trains in crew, and the boys would leave the mics on the station and their guitars and go off and have a cheese sandwich, where I would sit with the mics and the guitars because I knew someone was going to steal them. And then what? Then we wouldn't be able to play in wherever we were going to play, Galashiels or something. And I'd say, but if they were stolen, we wouldn't have been able to do the show. And they went, great. It never occurred to me to be like that, conscientious to the end.
My name is Keith Altham. I was a features editor at the New Musical Express.
I don't want your lonely mansion.
I think the very first occasion that I became conscious of Dusty's existence would have been on my old black and white television set in 1961-62 when she was with the Springfields.
But you think I should be happy.
She was a rather odd-looking character in a bell-shaped skirt, I seem to recall. The song that I latched onto was Silver Threads and Golden Needle.
Silver threads and golden needles cannot mend this heart of mine. And I dare not drown my sorrow in the warm glow of your wine.
The voice was the thing that really got to me. She sang like Marilyn Monroe looked. That she had that kind of childlike vulnerability and sensitivity. That's what my first sort of impressions of her were, and they pretty much proved to be correct later when I interviewed her.
I loved that song. It was a complete fluke. We weren't country singers. Well, its basis is in Scottish and Irish music, so it was very easy to do. Well, it came up through my brother. My brother was the ideas man. It certainly didn't come through me.
Silver threads and golden needles cannot
I'm Pat Rhodes. I was Dusty's PA for nearly 40 years. We first met in 1963. I worked for the Springfields manager, who was Emmeline Griffiths, and we used to giggle all the time because this particular man, bless him, would nod off in the afternoons because he had to have his pink gins, and every time the Springs came in, he would be on his desk fast asleep. And she'd say to me, I'm just going to open the door and go, boo. And I'd say, please, please don't. Let me just ring quietly on the phone. But she would wait. And that's how I first met her and I got to know her.
I saw a clip not so long ago of the Springfields doing Hey Up Boy With My Way. And I announced it, and I'd obviously been to the Sylvia Peters School of Announcing, because I went, that was a Zulu tune. I went, I don't believe I said that. And I still had my red hair, the hair I was born with, which is, being Irish Scottish, was bright red.
Little by little, I came more and more, slowly but surely, now you matter to me.
We managed to make sort of a record that sounded semi-country, which is an enormous hit in the States. So they sort of grabbed us off there thinking we were a country group, and we weren't remotely. I mean, they were writing songs in the morning and expecting us to sing them in the afternoon. It took us 3 weeks to rehearse one verse for something, so it was a pretty frightening experience.
More and more, without a warning, you're important to me.
Somewhere along the way, I sensed that we were all in it as a means to an end. It served us very well. And when we split up, it was not, as some people viewed it, my going off on my own. I mean, my brother had it, but he wrote some very successful things thereafter for the Seekers and things which sort of followed on from the Springfields very well.
In the October, they were going to break up. Then she said, I've been watching you. Every time I've asked you to get somebody to play in the background, I need a pianist, anything, she said, you've managed to do it. I'd like you to be my secretary. Would you do it? Think about it. And a couple of weeks later, she had Vic Billings came in with her, who was going to manage her, and she didn't say a word. She sat there very quietly, and she got Vic to ask me again, because she was quite shy. And he said, oh, I understand you might possibly be considering becoming Dusty's PA. So I said, yes, I have thought about it, and yes, I'd love to. And she jumped up, gave me a hug.
It was on her initial trip to America, to record in Nashville with the Springfields, that something happened to Dusty which would have a profound influence on her.
We had a stopover in New York, my first time ever, and I was going past a record shop, and I heard Tell Him by the Exciters blaring out. I know something about love. Go on, and I went, that's it!
If that guy's got into your blood, go out and get him. If you want him to be the very part of you, make you want to breathe, here's the thing to do. Tell him that you're never gonna leave him. Tell him that you're always gonna love him. Tell him right now.
And then I went down to Nashville. I think that was where I first heard Dionne Warwick. I heard Don't Make Me Over.
Don't make me over. Now that I do anything for you. Don't make me over. Now that you know how I adore you.
And I was at the Capitol Motel. And I remember they started this record, and I had a bedside radio on, you know, it was very American. I love motels, you know, they're so clean. We didn't have anything like them then. And I had to sit down very hard on the bed, because I said, what's that?
Don't make me over.
Now that you've had anything for... The harmonies on that. Oh, my God.
Don't make me over.
Now I want to do pop music.
I would
I've always wanted to emulate people who have big voices, and people often think I have a big voice, but I don't. It just sounds like that maybe on record. I don't have the pipes for that. It was people who were fairly obscure in this country that influenced me, singers like Baby Washington and Mitty Collier. Chained to a memory, only those in love. That's how heartaches are made. That's how heartaches are made.
They told me I was such a fool to love you. They say that you're the kind who'd never be true. Pretty soon the day would come when I'd be the sorry one.
I used to cover all these things and put them on albums. They were all early records like Garnet Mims and the Enchanters.
I should have told her that I needed her when I had the chance.
They were great records. Those were my biggest influences. But I know that's what I wanted to do. So I did. And they were like pale copies of them, but that was novel in this country.
I should have told him then, over and over again, that I love him.
Where did you find that song, Dusty? I swiped up Garnet Mims.
It was easier to hurt him. Ooh, it was easier to hurt him. Ooh, it was easier to hurt him. That's what I thought was being so smart. Thought I was smart. The way I cheated him and mistreated him. How could I forget?
I'm Vicky Wickham. I was good friends with Dusty, and later I managed her. Dusty and I first met in 1963, and I was sort of like a junior editor-producer on a new show called Ready, Steady, Go. The Springfields were on the pilot, but Dusty came into the office and said, whoops, no Springfields, I've left. That was the first time I met Dust, and we went somewhere and unbelievably had a cup of tea. We really became friends from the beginning. We had a lot in common. Dusty hosted Ready, Steady, Go several times and was really good at it.
I got some questions to ask you here. Paul, do you mind girls screaming all through your act?
No, we like them screaming, generally all of us, but it's a bit much all the way through.
Yeah.
But we love them screaming.
John, this is a question which you've probably been asked 1,000 times before, but you always, all of you give different versions or different answers. So you got to tell me now, how did the Beatles get their name?
I just thought of it.
You just thought of it? Another brilliant thing.
It was nuts when they used to do it at Kingsway, right? There were just crowds outside and the police were always there, and you used to sort of have the police push the crowds back to get in. Maybe it wasn't insane for anyone else, but then I was always late. Is she here or isn't she? And but I actually was there. I mean, Sandy Shaw wasn't once. So Phil.
One time I was on Ready, Steady, Go, and I was doing other things at the time when Dusty announced me, so she filled in for me. I hope she didn't do it as well as I did, but I bet she did. There was only a few dressing rooms there, so I got to know her quite intimately because all the girls were shoved in the same dressing room. Because both of us were completely myopic, we would end up putting each other's items of underwear or whatever was to hand on and having to sort of hand them back when they didn't fit. Oh no, this one belongs to you, isn't it? Is this are these your tights? No, they're my tights.
Dusty Springfield.
The audience really was what it was about. The hell with the act. It was how's my dress and how's my hair. They were more worried about that. And to have to perform with people in your face was so totally unnatural. You'd stand on these little daises and they were so close, they used to goose you. I was really incredibly shy.
She would lash on so so much makeup that you couldn't see this pretty little face underneath. It was quite a cute little face. I saw it because I saw her, you know, putting these layers on one after the other. So she was kind of like an object of kind of curiosity as well as anything else. And she had a strange way of dressing which wasn't fashionable. She kind of made it up herself. It just really worked for her because her singing was kind of so extravagant in the way that she actually stood and waved her arms about a lot. She really was a whole package.
So every day I had to cry some. Every day I had to cry some. Dry the water from my...
There was a certain influence on the booking of Ready, Steady, Go, unbeknownst to me, because I was so enthusiastic about black acts that nobody knew over here. So I think they were quite pleased to be breaking new ground. I mean, they grumbled about the food and they grumbled about the weather, but basically they were really kind of intrigued about being in England.
Dusty was wonderful to invite the whole Motown Revue to the UK.
Motown star Martha Reeves.
It was just amazing how well it went and how great it was received. And I always said that everyone was jealous because I had a duet with Dusty.
Dusty Springfield's first hit as a solo artist was I Only Want to Be With You, released in November 1963.
Don't know what it is that makes me love you so. I only know I never wanna let you go. 'Cause you started something, can't you see? That ever since we met you had a hold on me. It happens to be true. I only wanna be with you. It doesn't matter where you go or what you do. I wanna spend each moment of the day with you. Although what has happened, just one kiss. I never knew that I could be in love like this. It's crazy, but it's true. I only wanna be with you. You start to smile at me, asked if I cared to dance. I fell into your open arms, and I didn't stand a chance. Now listen, buddy, I just wanna be beside.
By then I was on to wanting to cop Phil Spector sounds, that wall of sound thing, and knew that there was going to be a space for that in this country because it hadn't hit here, and I was the one to do it. Drove the musicians crazy, got a pretty good approximation, and I knew that it would work.
Stay a while, let me hold you. Stay a while, till I told you all the love that I feel tonight. Oh, yeah.
When Dusty first went solo and went into a recording studio, she asked them for a certain thing, they couldn't get it. They didn't know what she was talking about. The elderly type musician wasn't having a girl telling them what to do. That's obvious what it was. She did have a hard time to start with, but in the end, they came round and they realised here was a woman that knew everything about music. They knew as much as they did, and even more, and then she got their respect. She was happy in the studio when she could twiddle knobs and that. It wasn't Johnny Franz, it was Dusty. And he had enough sense to let her get on with it. She wanted to be a record producer, really, secretly. But she had such a good voice, she couldn't let it go. She used to win the NME pole concert. I don't know how many years she won it, about 3 years in succession. And she kept saying, can't believe this. She wasn't a person that liked the trophies and things.
She loved soul music. Amongst the people that she loved were Martha Reeves and the Vandellas. I mean, her great thing in life was to have been a Vandella.
We made friends in New York when Dusty was over on her first American tour. I was asked by Murray Kaufman to come with him, and we were standing outside of a door at one of the dressing rooms and heard all of this china being smashed up and this voice shouting insanities, profanities and insanities. So I walked in the door and she was looked like a great time throwing things, so I started picking up pieces of broken china, throwing them too. As soon as I could get a word in, I asked her what was wrong. She was tired of being in that room alone and she needed someone just to talk to. She needed company. And that was the beginning of our relationship. It was all about the Vandellas standing backstage behind the curtain.
Because they used to do off-stage backups for Marvin Gaye. There was always a Vandella missing. One Vandella would have a hangover or something, and there was always a part of hitchhike, hitchhike, baby, missing. So I got to be a Vandella, but I never got to be on stage as a Vandella. Hitchhike. I've got to find that girl if I have to hitchhike round the world. Just being able to stand in the wings and listen to Marvin Gaye. Chicago city limits, that's what the sign on the highway read. Hitchhike. As pretty as you are. And the Temptations. Copying the horn parts. Da, 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 da. Okay, I remember that. Take it home and do it on the next record I did. It was just the most wonderful thing. I don't know how they felt personally, but they were always really nice. I mean, was it Claudette or Claudine? Smokey's wife, Claudette. They were always cooking on the top floor, and they would always invite me up. I don't know whether I was just a token whitey, or whether they genuinely liked me, but I was always treated really well. Went everywhere, hung out. It was a marvelous time. We used to land up at all-night bars and party, and it was great, and I never got in any trouble. I was just having a really good time and soaking up influences. But some of the people I didn't work with, like the Velvelettes and the Marvelettes, they affected me, those early records. Please, Mr. Postman and all of that. And most of all, the Shirelles. Mama said there'd be days like this, there'd be days like this, Mama said. Oh, it was so precise. They were on a yellow label, Scepter. Now, see, that was the other thing. Didn't Dion start there? Yeah. And, you know, there were various schools developing. I met a little boy named Billy Joe, and then I almost lost my mind. Mama said there'll be days like this, there'll be days like this, my mama said. Mama said there'll be days like this, there'll be days like this, my mama said.
You're listening to Definitively Dusty on BBC Radio 2. Dusty had grown up with a love of Brazilian music and always longed to go to Rio for the annual carnival. With a newfound success as solo artist, she was about to realise that dream. She went to Brazil with her brother Tom, Madeleine Bell and Martha Reeves.
I remember Martha being there because we had a picture taken at Corcovado, you know, the big statue of Christ that overlooks Rio, and she's standing there and she's got gold lame pants on, I do remember that, and a headscarf. And I think I have a headscarf because it was windy up there, and you know, the beehive didn't want to see it flying down to Rio.
We did see a lot of music in the street. We walked Corcovado, Ipanema, the strip along the water, and followed the bands with colorful costumes and the floats and all the work that goes into their festival, and it's something to see.
They're called Escola da Samba. They come from favelas and they rehearse all year round. And each district has its own band. They go into this parade ground, but at the end is like a collecting ring for all the bands. And they're all dancing and playing, you know, maybe 40 drummers. It's just brilliant. I've never, ever experienced a feeling like it. I mean, it was just insanity. I stayed up for 3 days and 3 nights dancing and didn't drink a thing. It was just purely drug of the music. And to this day, there is nothing that will make me dance more than hearing a samba band.
As Dusty developed a unique musical style through the 60s, she was also becoming just as well known for her very distinctive look.
A lot of French Vogue models had black eyelids. And I can't put my glasses on to put my eyes on. I can't get at them. So I can't really see very well. So any of that sort of, people call it a panda look, was a series of mistakes that just stuck because that's all I could do. That's all I could see. And worked fine. It drove the makeup departments nuts. And indeed, you couldn't see my eyes half the time, but I didn't care.
For Dusty, preparation to go on stage was, to her, it was a nightmare. For a start, she wouldn't have anybody else in the room, and she would sit cross-legged on the floor in front of the biggest mirror she could find. In fact, that was something I always used to have to ask for in a dressing room, with horrible bright lights. And she'd sit in there quietly and say to me, "OK, I'll call you when I need you," and she'd put her own makeup on. This is in the very early days. And she would sit there for maybe an hour solidly. She'd do her own hair, do all her own makeup, and then, obviously, I was able to go in and help her dress.
Beehive, it was just the happening thing to wear at that time. The worst time for a beehive is to share a very small dressing room with the Ronettes. And with 4 beehives, you have to be very careful. And not breathe too deeply, because all of that hairspray, I'm afraid I'm probably, between the Ronettes and I, responsible for the entire hole in the ozone layer. I still love hairspray, but I use the environmentally friendly kind.
In April 1964, her top 10 debut album, A Girl Called Dusty, was released. It included some of her favourite songs of the time, Mama Said, You Don't Owe Me, and 24 Hours from Tulsa.
Dearest, darling, I had to write to say that I won't be home anymore, for something happened to me as I was driving home, and I'm not the same anymore. Oh, I was only 24 hours from Tulsa, only one day away from your arms. I saw the welcoming light and stopped to rest for the night, and that is when I saw you. As I pulled in outside of a small hotel, he was there, and so I walked up to him, asked where I could get something to read, and he showed me where. Oh, I was only 24 hours from Tulsa, only one day away from your arms. He took me to the cafe, and he asked me if I would stay. I said, okay.
Dusty was fast becoming one of the UK's biggest female stars and was consequently in demand to appear in clubs and concert halls across the country.
The early tours were mostly, the Searchers and Brian Poole and the Tremolos and Freddie and the Dreamers and whoever was the current American hit. Bobby V. Oh, Bobby V. Oh, I love Bobby V. I used to angle to sit next to him on the coach. The second trip he brought his wife. Well, actually his sweetheart, it wasn't his wife. So then I got to sit next to his uncle. And Tony Orlando. Yep. And whoever the current, it was Del Shannon. To this day, I mean, it's transfixed in my mind Madame Tussauds, because the bus always used to leave from the side of Madame Tussauds at 8 o'clock in the morning. Luckily, I lived at the top of Baker Street, over the ABC restaurant that was there at the time. We always used to joke about it because I would arrive for 5 minutes to 8, get on the bus, and rigidly together, you know, the hair together, the face together, the clothes together, and so it was sit upright all the way to Bristol or Cannock.
In the middle of nowhere, how can you let it die? In the middle of nowhere, how you gonna leave me? Leave my heart astray. I'm in the middle of nowhere, come and show me the way.
I mean, all the lads were sort of hung over and God knows what from the night before, and I was sort of the only girl on the bus. And God, I would sit upright all the way because I'd be perfectly ready. But that's what it was about. It was just about being ready. And the one time I was just too tired to do it all. I think it was Taunton or Exeter. I just didn't put my makeup on that day, which was, you know, unheard of. And there were a few people at the stage door. And as I went in, I heard two women talking to each other saying, "Oh, she didn't look good, does she?" And I never did it again. Because Joan Crawford used to get off the set, take her face off, put on a glamour day face, because there would be people at the studio gate to go home and take it all off again. I understand that stuff. Because you owe your public. You know, they don't want to see you looking lousy. It doesn't matter how tired you are.
When we first started and were touring, Dusty was great. She used to travel on the bus with the same, all of us. She sort of kept it very light-hearted with the lads, so they never felt awkward because we were the only two women on the bus, obviously. But she was always late for the bus. And the bus driver used to get very annoyed and say, the next time she's late, I'm going to go without her. What they didn't know, the girl was going to Mass before she came, because she was a good Catholic. So in the end, she decided that we better drive there in future. She used to get Dougie, who was the leader of the Echoes, to drive us there.
Places with no dressing rooms, we used to sort of get changed in the manager's office in the gallery. I can't say those were the days because they were bloody awful. But it was a good experience, it really was, yes.
Dougie Reese. I played bass for the Echoes, and I was musical director for Dusty Springfield from 1963 till 1970. I went to a place where she lived in Baker Street. We went through quite a few records, and she sort of said to me, listen to the drum pattern, or listen to the bass line. And at the time, a lot of the bass lines were just two in the bar, just a boom, 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 boom. The stuff she played, there was a pattern to the bass player. Boom, ba-do-do-doom, doom, ba-do-do-do, that sort of thing, as against boom, boom. And the same with the guitarist, and same with the drummer. She'd just say, I just want the drums to go boom, boom. So it then left gaps in the music where you can put the voice. She wanted the Phil Spector sound, and I'd try and convert that with the four-piece band I had, which was really hard. But we eventually managed to do it. And we went off to South Africa, and it all happened there, to say the least.
South Africa was a real muddle. I suppose I had ideals, but I also was politically very naive. I was naive in every way. And to my great surprise, the Musicians' Union in England backed me up on having a clause written into the contract that I would not perform to segregated audiences. What the promoter had found was that you could indeed have mixed audiences if you played live music in a cinema, and it was a loophole. To this day, I wonder if it was a setup by the government, because they were very, very clever, very slippery. I mean, I was stupidly idealistic to think I could have any power to pull that off. Because when I got there, they were standing under the wings of the plane, government persons in raincoats, saying, sign this to say you go back on what you had in your contract. The boys in the band and I talked about that. There was no way we were going to go back on it.
We did the first show in Johannesburg. She said to me, don't start the show until you see a mixed audience. And the guy said, we've got to start at 8:30. I said, no, I'm not going to start the show until it's a mixed audience. After about 10 minutes, I looked out, and sure enough, the mixed audience, and I said, OK, off we go. 1, 2, 3, 4, play. It was great. I mean, the audiences were fabulous.
You don't own me. I'm not just one of your many toys.
When we did the concert in Cape Town, we were told that we had to leave the country the next day.
They politely put it that, I can't remember the exact wording, but Her Majesty, blah, 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 withdraws your right to be in the country. And then they tried to work out what to do with us. So they put us under kind of what I would call hotel arrest, is, you know, don't leave the hotel, and kept sending up tomato sandwiches. I don't know whether to cry or laugh, because now I look back on it. Was I the reason that that loophole was closed? Was that naivety or what? Yeah, on my part it was. Did they suddenly realize that someone had come in and was going to make fools of them? Without meaning to. I would love to have made fools of them. Okay, so it was a gesture. And it was appreciated.
Tell me what to say.
When we left Johannesburg Airport, you had to walk across the tarmac to get to the plane. Well, all the people that moved the luggage around, all the porters, were African people. They used to have blue boiler suits and red hats. And as we approached them, they formed a line, all took their hats off and smiled at us as we went past. That was a sign of thank you. And I'll always remember that.
Don't tell you what to say. I don't tell you what to do. So just let me be myself. That's all I ask of you.
Why did you have this special anti-apartheid clause written into your contract? Do you feel strongly politically about this?
No, I don't know the first thing about politics. All I know is that anybody, if they want to buy a ticket, should be allowed to do so.
The hard part was coming back and being accused of doing it for publicity. Like my mother, I was really a naive person, and I had ideals and didn't realize that I had no power. I just thought that it would be all right, you know. I maybe could make a difference, fat chance. But maybe in my own way I did make a little difference to those who were listening. Io che non vivo più da un'ora senza te. I heard that song at Sanremo Festival. Italians are so wonderfully emotional about their appreciation of things. You know, in the middle of a lot of big Italian ballads, there's a massive Puccini-like massed strings passage. And I just fell on the floor in a heap, weeping. I said, I've got to do that song.
Vieni qui, ascoltami.
And lived in fear for about a year, sort of kept it under the bed thinking someone's going to do it. It wasn't the time for me to do one of those songs. But it wasn't time for a ballad. And when it became time for a ballad, I dug it out from under the bed and asked Vicky, and she asked Simon Napier Bell.
Oh, Dusty's got a song she wants some lyrics for, which is an Italian song, and she wanted English lyrics, and could I tell you someone you should go to get the lyrics? And I said, well, why don't we do them? And I thought you'd say, no, we couldn't possibly, but you said, yes, let's. And I said, it's an Italian song, we don't know what it's about, but it's obviously a love song, so it has to have I Love You in it. And you were very unromantic in those days, and you shuddered and said, absolutely, I won't have I Love You in the song. I said, OK, we'll put I Don't Love You. Even you said that's going a bit fake. You can't have I Don't Love You. So I said, well, you don't have to love me. OK, well, you don't have to love me. But that didn't fit the melody. Oh, you don't have to say you love me. That fitted it perfectly. And that was it. We rushed off to the I Did Club for the night. And actually, we didn't much like doing lyrics because we were 10 minutes late for the club.
Typical.
I called you up the next day and said, this is awful. And you said, well, what are you going to do about it? So I gave the lyrics to Dusty, who basically had the same feeling. Ooh, I don't like these, but OK, they'll have to do. She recorded it. It went to #1. And even to this day, I flinch slightly at some of the lyrics.
When I said I needed you, you said you would always stay. It wasn't me who changed, but you, and now you've gone away. Don't you see the night? That I have to follow you and beg you to come home. You don't have to say you love me, just be close at hand. You don't have to stay forever, I will understand. Believe me, I can't help but love you. But believe me, I'll never tie you down. Left alone with just a memory. Life seems dead and so unreal. All that's left is loneliness. There's nothing left to
It's a lifesaver, that song. I mean, I dread doing it every time I have to do it because I dread the key change. A love-hate relationship. You know, if everything else has gone wrong, when I get to that song, I know it's going to be all right. Besides, it gets me off the stage.
You Don't Have to Say You Love Me proved to be Dusty Springfield's most successful record across the world, becoming her signature tune for the rest of her career. In the next programme, we'll hear how Dusty's international appeal led her to a new life and recording in America. Definitively Dusty is a Sue Clark production. This is Radio 2 on the BBC Sounds app, on digital radio, and on 88 to 91 FM.
BBC Sounds. Music, radio, podcasts.
Hi and welcome to the Popmaster podcast from BBC Radio 2. It's me, Jo Wiley, sitting in for Ken all this week on the Mid-Morning